But the only way you can really improve your audition skills is by actually going out.
Audition.
Exactly. The same way someone wants to increase their public speaking skills, the only way you're going to do that is by going out and giving more speeches.
It's just that's why.
There's no other way to get around that.
No, I think where you're coming from is brilliant. Can you realize, like, could you walk me through what was the first? You don't have to name names or any specifics, but just what was the first time you worked with somebody and you realized this has value because I can see it in them.
Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here with Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the home, the place, the platform to help you find your best, most true, authentic business voice. Maybe we just shorten that up to find your best authentic voice. Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results, meet the persons of your dreams, win multiple Academy Awards. We can't promise those last two, but we brought a guest on that we're hoping gets us closer to there. But if we can get you a little further on your journey to your own arc to authenticity, then hopefully we're doing our job. And we're delighted that you keep watching, listening, sharing, subscribing. It means a lot to me. And one of the reasons I get very excited that I get to do this show at all is I get to have guests who walk the walk. Tonight absolutely is no exception. And we get to welcome Albert Bramante, who happens to be a talent agent, who happens to be a published author of Rise Above the Script, who happens to be, again, an accomplished writer, 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry, PhD in psychology from Walton University, is a certified hypnotist and NLP practitioner, which to me is pretty damn impressive. So, Albert, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, John, for having me. I'm really happy to be here and be on your show. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm delighted. And one of the reasons we talked about, folks, before we went live, one of the things that really drew me to Albert is that sense of being able to help people. I'm using my words, like, I don't know if it's even accurate, but to burst out of or pull themselves away from handcuffs as it relates to accomplishing goals. Tonight, we're going to touch on the ways that Albert helps actors improve their craft, to speak, communicate, to be able to bring more of themselves into a role. I also see how important this is in regards to day-to-day life, how important this is in regards to almost any context, so that you are not hamstrung in terms of the ways that you're limiting yourself. One of the things right away, Albert, that I was going to ask you is, what drew you to this field?
I've always been a curious individual.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved to read growing up. Being that I was kind of in a family, born into a family where I was different. And that's a good thing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my brothers and my father was all into athletics and
Okay.
really into it, and they were passionate about it. And
Mm-hmm.
my older brother and my father were coaches, so sports coaches. And I think the fundamental aspect of coaches will kind of got me into it a little bit, although in a different fashion. So I've always been just interested in the mind and the human experience. So I read a lot of books when I was in high school. I was always just a curious person that loved to learn. And so I started reading books about the brain, about human behavior when I was in high school, and I just really became so drawn to them. And so that's where I kind of said, I want to study psychology. That's what I want to do during my college years. I want to have a PhD in psychology, and I want to be a college professor and have a practice. And that was my goal. for most of my collegiate life. Now things kind of took a derail a little bit, as life happens. So when I received my master's degree, this is right around the time 9/11 had happened, and I made some contacts throughout my grad school years through internships, where we kind of hit the ground running afterwards. They invited me back to help, and so a lot of the work I did from like 2001, 2002, in that space was like crisis intervention, advocacy, working with rescue workers, their families, people who had been displaced. And during that time, I started meeting actors. And I should say, even though I wasn't really interested in the creative arts, I did take some classes in college in acting and theater. And I was in the high school drama club. So I had a little bit of an interest in the field. Although I really didn't see myself working at this time. And it, quite incidentally, I always cite this example. If you told me when I was in my early 20s I'd be in show business, I would have laughed at you and said, "Oh, that's ridiculous, that's absurd."
Why?
Because I had no interest in it at the time. I
Okay.
didn't know. I didn't know. I was so into reading psychology. I wasn't really into movies. I really wasn't into TV. So it was just I wanted to read. I like to read, and that was like my outlet and my vehicle. So after when I was doing this work with 9/11, I started meeting a lot of actors and producers, and that were also volunteering and giving back their time. And I started to get interested in again, naturally gravitate towards this again, because I did have that slight interest in it, not again fully. So I went into acting a little bit myself. While I was being an actor, I started meeting other actors, of course, and networking with other actors,
Sure.
and I found myself drawn to helping them. So we would have these meetings, where actors would get together, and every time I would go to this meeting, I would always have like a prepared list of casting notices that for people that I knew were going to be there, and I would hand them to them, which is really unheard of. Nobody ever did that. So I had a few actors tell me, "I wish you could be my agent," and at that time, I didn't think anything of it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until I realized after a little bit of doing this, I really don't want to be an actor. I don't want to be. For me, this is not. Yeah, I'm not enjoying the process. I enjoy the environment. I enjoy the people, but I wasn't really so much into the process of acting. So it was a short-lived experience. So I decided I was going to work in more production. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was like my mid-20s and that phase of what am I doing in my life sort of thing. So at this time, I was just hired to start teaching at a community college in intro to psych and child psychology classes, and I really enjoyed it. And in a little bit, I'll tell you what this leads to, because that experience was a springboard for me and a lot of my expertise moving forward. So I get after a while, I'm just exploring. I said, I really wanted to start a business. I want to own a business. I want to work for myself. Well, why don't I support actors in some way? How would that look like? I'm not sure. Then I would brought back to the thing that I'm a connector, which is something I've always done. You know, in all aspects of my life, I'm very good at bringing people together. So, what best way to connect actors to production and actors to roles by being an agent? So, 2004, I started my first company, and then I made the kind of like wanted to fulfill a promise and my goal, lifelong goal. I already had my master's degree. I wasn't entirely sure what was going to happen with my business yet. Let me go back for my PhD. I'm
Albert,
already
forgive me. I didn't mean to jump, but before you continue, I'm curious about two things, and then I do want to come back to your PhD.
sure, sure,
I'm
sure,
very
sure.
interested in something. When you were, like I said, being approached, and you had other actors asking you, "Oh, I wish you were my agent," and you were thinking, "Hey, maybe that's the field that I should get into." Do you think it's possible, like with actors, that sometimes, like from my limited experience, you either sought acting coaches or you sought agents, because that was really the two ways that someone could help you: make me a better actor or get me work. And so was it interesting, and it was so interesting, and from your perspective, you're thinking maybe I should become an agent. What sent you in this direction instead, to be going back to get your PhD and going more toward the science side? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, I've always wanted to get a PhD, and at that time, well, I'll kind of backtrack. So when I received my master's degree, I had applied to 4 PhD programs, and just to give you the audience, a snapshot, PhD programs are incredibly competitive to get into, at least the land-based ones
Right.
at that time. So I didn't get in, and I'll be honest, I didn't get into any of the 4 that I applied, because otherwise I would have just went straight, for my bachelor's. Because I did my bachelor's and master's back to back 6 years with no breaks. I was planned to start right into my PhD and then do that complete. Well, I didn't get in. So now, okay, what do I do? September came around. And so that's when I started applying for jobs. And I mean, unfortunately, 9/11 had happened, so that made the job hunt a little more difficult, but it led me to doing some advocacy work. I worked in a couple of different positions in New York City doing crisis intervention right around the 9/11 disaster and aftermath.
Absolutely.
So that, and like I said, it was also during this time that I was acting, pursuing the acting profession. And what really stood out to me was like, okay, I'm already halfway finding casting notes, that's what agents do. So that's why I was like, the natural transition to let me be an agent, because now this is sort of what I'm doing. To be an acting coach, I would have to have training in acting, which I didn't have. So I wouldn't be qualified to be an acting coach, because I didn't have really the life experience or the training. Because in order to really be an acting coach, I mean, anybody can call themselves a coach, as you know, but to be a true acting coach, or at least for integrity, you should have at least a couple of decades of experience as an actor, as well, or at least have a BFA or an MFA into theater and acting, which I didn't have. So, but I really felt myself being an agent. But ultimately, and let me go backtrack. I always felt like I'm being a teacher at heart. My mom was a teacher. And I think with the coach, when I said earlier, my older father and my oldest brother.
Well, your dad's a coach, and right? I mean,
yeah, and my oldest brother's a coach. So I think between those combination, the teacher and coaching, I've had it in my blood to always teach. And I've always had images or fantasies of me in front of a classroom teaching, ever since I was like in 3rd grade.
Okay.
And so now this is coming true, because I was hired in 2003 to be a part-time college instructor at my community college, a 2-year college in my county, New Jersey. So that was starting to be fulfilled. So, and in order to really have a career in psychology, you have to have a PhD. In order to really be a teacher, you have to have a PhD. Even at the community college, even though you can hire as a master's degree, but it's preferable if you have a PhD. So it was a combination of those factors. And also, I wasn't entirely sure what the talent agency was going to look like yet. So I was like, let me enroll in Walden, because at that time it was pioneer program, because it was totally online. So it was a lot easier to get into than a land-based program. So I was like, why not I just get my PhD and see where this goes. I've made a promise. I've always, made a promise to my grandparents when I was younger I'd be a doctor. So I was like, let me build this. So while I was starting to do this, my agency was building up. The one issue that I kept running up against with actors was self-sabotage. And when it came time after the end of the first year of a PhD program, we have to kind of start defining our dissertation. which is like the end project for a PhD. That's the end, like the end goal. So what project were we going to do it? At this time going into it, I really didn't have any idea. It wasn't until I was at a weekend seminar, because we, even though it was an online program, we had to do like several hundred hours of face-to-face time. And so we met at different areas of the country at different times of the year. So my first, like what we call a residency, we had to start brainstorming dissertation topics. And the advice that I received was pick a problem that inspires you or something that you really wanted the answer to. And at that time, I wanted to know what's up with these actors. Why are they shooting themselves in the foot? Why are they being their own worst enemy? And when I presented that, they loved it at Alden. And I'm like, this is great. So my dissertation became self-defeating behavior in performing arts.
Man, if I ask you, um, when you came up with the idea and then delivered on the idea, was it from an observation, or were actors coming to you and saying this is a problem? And it sounded like, based on the way that you just answered, if I heard correctly, this was your own astute observations that led you to something that, as you had said, that inspired you, which then gave you this blueprint, which I think is fascinating.
It was kind of a combination of both, because self-sabotage is a very sneaky thing. Most people don't realize they're doing it. It's an unconscious pattern.
Sure.
So it's not like these actors saying, "Hey, I'm self-sabotaging," but what they were coming to me was saying, "Why am I not getting auditions, or why am I not getting work?" And clearly, a lot of the reasons were because of things they were doing to kind of like shoot themselves in the foot, or to hold themselves back, like being their own worst enemy. So that's where it was a combination of both, but it was a pattern I noticed a lot. And also it was a pattern I noticed in my students too, because I was most of my students were community college students, which were fresh, 18, 21-year olds.
Right.
And a lot of them were very smart, but they weren't applying themselves. And they weren't really trying. And so and I even said to myself a lot of times at night, I have these great students? Why are some of them not, they don't believe it, that they're great? And that's where I think, and I remember I had one student one time. She was in class, and I think trying to be a little arrogant and cocky in front of her friends, and I kind of, in a nice way, pointed out to her, she said, "Oh, I bet you think I bet you think I'm stupid." I said, "No, I think you're incredibly smart." I was like, and I turned around and said, "How do you feel about that? How do you feel?" I don't think you feel that way about yourself. And it was like silent. And that's where I noticed a big theme that kept happening up there. So that is something that I noticed a lot. And that led me to do my dissertation, which then led into my, several years later, writing my book.
I think one of the things that I find like I'm getting this very strong impression that you come from I'm going to say, a non-linear way of addressing a problem, meaning, and I say that as a high compliment, meaning that typically actors want, again, acting lessons, or they want agents. And so in essence, it's more of the do the work for me. And I'm not taking shots at actors, but it's more do the work for me. Find me work, make me better, and then you have value to me. There are so many fields that I have found in the communications field, in the real estate field, and so where the training is so hyper specific that it's almost like passing a multiple choice test in the coaching, which means your ability to be able to think, your confidence, the way that you naturally speak is never addressed or touched. And oftentimes it's because people just don't see the need for it, that I would just rather be myself. I'm just me. So I'm curious, you're armed now with this information. You use it for your PhD and what have you. And you have people coming to you, or to use the example you just gave a second ago, where you're talking about you ask the question and they're silent. What do you think the breakthrough was for people to understand this has value to me? And I see and understand the value, and therefore I want to hire you to do this for me. That to me feels like so many leaps to get there.
Yeah.
How'd you make it work for you?
Well, the one thing, as you state, I don't make I mean, I help create miracles. I don't make them happen because
You're
you have to do
expected
that.
to.
No, and so it's all about helping you tap into your own
Mhm.
greatness and everybody's greatness. And that's where NLP comes in and hypnosis comes into it. It's not about me giving you anything. I'm just helping you tap into what you already have.
Right.
And so that's sort of like what I feel is if a person is ready to receive the help,
Mhm.
I can help you tap into your own, resources
Mhm.
and your own sort of greatness. I'm not going to give you the answers for you. It's like the same thing. Like me being a teacher, I can help you learn the material. I'm not going to directly, impart the knowledge into your brain. You have to take that extra step yourself to do that.
I'm wondering, because that's where I acknowledge it, because I really believe in my heart that's where the real value lies. But
Hmm.
as I've learned from my own experience, uh, in terms of coaching, teaching, and what have you, others have to see that value for it to actually have value. And
Yeah.
so I find it to be a two-pronged situation. I acknowledge the fact that it's really clear to me how the value comes from, because in almost every single profession I've ever encountered, you're not going to do the work for them. And you know what I mean? It's just not, that option's not on the table. You give the gift so that they can do the work themselves. I'm curious, when did it start to break for you? When you started to realize, oh, I might be onto something.
Well, I think after my dissertation was complete
Right.
and a lot of because the stuff that I started seeing was scientifically like there when I did my study, and just my years of experience, I think just experiential hands-on doing this. It's one thing to read something out of a book or read a research study.
Yep.
It's great, but it's another thing to experience it fully.
Hmm.
And this is why I always often tell even the actors or anybody I work with, real life experience is going to be much more instructive than a book can be. I love books. I wrote book. I'm an author. I love books, but I do also think that there should be a combination of practicality there
Hmm.
and practical life experiences. Like the one thing you could, as an actor, you could read so many books about auditions, listen to video instructions on how to audition. But the only way you can really improve your audition skills is by actually going out.
Audition.
Exactly. The same way someone wants to increase their public speaking skills, the only way you're going to do that is by going out and giving more speeches.
It's just, that's why
There's no other way to get around that.
no, I think where you're coming from is brilliant. Uh, can you realize, like, could you walk me through what was the first? You don't have to name names or any specifics, but just what was the first time you worked with somebody and you realized this this has value because I can see it in them. What was that
One,
like?
sure. Well, I can tell you two different examples. One
Please.
example is from teaching. So, one semester, this is like even early in my teaching career,
Hmm.
I in my syllabus I make a requirement that class participation is important. It's part of the grade.
Okay.
And I had one student who emailed me anonymously, but I know who she was, but based upon the communication pattern. I mean, it took me, I didn't know exactly the moment, but after a while, we getting several emails from the student. So I got an email the first day of class saying, and I don't think it's fair that you're requiring participation. Now, my intuition said, okay, not get defensive. And I just kind of slipped it back. I said, why don't you think it's fair? I was like, what's stopping you from participating? And, it came down to a lengthy conversation where I've been embarrassed, growing up. I had teachers that yelled at me. And I said, the importance of participation is not to put you on the spot. It's because you have a lot of great points. And I want to hear them. And so do your classmates. And I didn't think anything of it. She didn't respond back to me.
Right.
But this student, yeah, recently afterwards, who was very shy, started speaking up more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had her for another class afterwards, and she was like my most vocal student. And it turns out she, told me that she was the one that sent the anonymous email out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just, getting someone to believe that they are capable of doing it. And then also, I used to sometimes would come into acting schools and guest teach, but I would do it more from the business side of acting and from an agent's perspective. There'd be already one or two acting teachers that were teaching the technique. So it was this one lady who's a client of mine now, an acting client, who for 9 or 10 years just couldn't break into acting. I mean, she was
Okay.
working hard, auditioning, but really not booking. However, outside of the acting side, she had a very successful career. She was a vice president of her department at a department store. So she had
Oh.
like a division. So she was leading up really high ranks in the corporate world,
Mm-hmm.
but just wasn't landing things acting wise. And the reason is that her confidence in her acting was so low, but her confidence in business was skyrocket high. So I threw together and said, why don't we transfer that confidence and that gravitas that you have when you're in a sales meeting or in a corporate meeting or
Mm-hmm.
talking to a customer or to a coworker. Now use that same energy when you're performing these roles. Because every time she would act, it was very soft and secure, playing small, very guarded. I was like, but when you speak, you're very expansive. Your voice is much deeper. You're much authoritarian. I said, why don't we transfer that to your acting? Let's work that together. And after she did that, she wound up with a couple of walk-on roles of speaking on like Orange is the New Black, Law and Order SVU, FBI, all TV shows within a 2-year period. So we went from 9 or 10 years of no booking to now booking,
Significant
consistent.
and significant television shows too.
Exactly. That are not easy to land.
Right.
So I the important thing in this aspect is just getting to know your greatness and what you are capable of, and that's what a true coach does.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to teach. Experience is what's going to teach you. Practice is what's going to really fully teach you the technical side of things. But as a coach, a good coach or good teacher has helped you realize the greatness that you have, so that you can then excel down the line.
You used a great choice of words and used it two different times, and you used the word transfer. And I find that to just be a really cool choice of words in regards to articulating the how do you make someone great. And it's transferring their experiences. I still do, and I have worked for years with a psychologist therapist in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania region. His name is Joseph Dowling. Folks, if anyone who is watched or listened to my show more than once has heard the name of Joe Dowling. He wrote a book called Zonefulness, and one of the ways he began by helping me personally. I utilized Joe. I was his first patient in terms of stopping smoking. Joe then became my therapist, and everything that we touched on had to do with personal stuff. And it was the
Hmm.
transferring. That's why you said, and I don't know that he uses the word, but it just lit me up because it was the ability to be able to transfer your success from one avenue to another that I really believed, well, this is this and that is that, and therefore I have to use a completely different set of skills when I do this. And I was taught in so many ways, no, you don't necessarily have to create an entirely different new persona and or skill set. So I love the way that you were able to take that individual, take their own specific success stories, transfer, or help her to transfer those skills into another direction. And that leads me to another question, which is, do you believe most profession like skill sets, why it was really important for me to have you on is so often in terms of coaching, training, what have you, uh, curriculums tend to focus on the technical aspects of a profession. And I don't dismiss those at all. I really
Right.
don't. My
No.
question is, though, that for you, that realization that you are able to bring to people, that you're able to transfer other life skills, other strengths. Um,
Hmm.
what do you think is the more important of the two, the technical or the, and I'm not going to call it intangible, this is very tangible traits.
Yeah, well, you can kind of consider like the hard skills, technical, the soft skills, the what you were describing, that the the tangible. So what I would say it's a combination of both on some level, because
Hmm.
you should now obviously get all the technical skills that you need
Sure.
and any profession. However, when you take away the mental roadblocks or blocks or subconscious blocks, the person will be the greatest that they can be at a certain skill.
Hmm.
Now, if we're looking at the context of athlete, I person may not be an athlete, an Olympian, but
Right,
however,
right.
if you can become really good at
Hmm.
a skill and do something at your own the best of your ability,
Hmm.
if you believe in practice, because one of the things about with when you have that mindset really leveled in, you're also going to be learning the technical side at a much faster rate because you're going to work much harder when you get that rate.
Wow.
When you work in the practice, you're going to work a lot harder when you already have the mindset to to achieve.
Yep.
So it's definitely a combination of both, and uh, you can't have one without the other. Like
Hmm.
if you don't really believe in yourself, it's going to be hard to be successful in your profession. But you also need technical skills. Yeah, I could turn around and say I see myself as a great doctor, but if I have no medical school training,
I,
no, how am I going to be with a patient? But
right.
at the same time, if I don't have the confidence
Hmm.
in myself, even if I have the med school training, that's not going to help me get patients or work with patients.
Yep.
So you need both. You need confidence. However, I think society tends to undermine the confidence aspect. And, okay, as long as you get the technical training, there you go.
Hmm. Hmm.
And especially with actors, one of the biggest thing I see with a lot of the actor education programs is they teach a technique, which is great and important, but they don't teach the mindset or the business skills that are necessary to be an actor.
Oh, absolutely correct. In Philadelphia.
And
Oh my
mhm,
God, Albert, there's two people in Philadelphia that I think about. This is more on the voiceover related side. They have really done a service in regards to teaching the business side of voiceover because no one was teaching it. And I think what you just said, the mindset and the business aspects, I believe you don't you talked about self-sabotage earlier where people will not say I'm self-sabotaging or they don't say that, um, but they exhibit all of the signs that that's exactly what they're doing.
yeah,
And I really believe that's a mindset scenario. I want to ask you, you referred to an article you wrote an article. I'm sorry. You have written several. I've leaned into some of your recent LinkedIn articles, which I find are great. And folks, do yourself a solid and make certain that you are following Albert Bramante on LinkedIn, where you can find these articles. But you and I were talking about at the beginning an article that fascinated me that was called "Why ADHD is a Creative Superpower, Not a Curse." And I think about self-sabotaging ways, what you can do. And to me, one of those ways is to label yourself in terms of a problem. This is a
Yeah.
problem, or I am a problem. What gave you in essence, what gave you the vision to write the article?
Well, it's just in general because a lot of people define themselves by maybe some of the challenges that they face.
Mhm.
Whether I use ADHD because it's common, and we have a mutual person who we had said earlier who um, kind of also talked about this too.
Yep.
So, and it was through this person that really inspired me to write that article. However, a lot of times we define ourselves by our problems. I have depression, so we may not say it, but we kind of say, I'm depressed. I'm depression, or
Hmm.
I'm anxiety, or I'm in debt. I'm a poor person. I'm this and
Hmm.
that. And ADHD is no different. So it's like what you're saying, you're identifying so much as it's being a problem because you're taught that in school.
Hmm.
You grew up in a school system that most of the time looked at as being a problem. Why aren't you learning like every other child is learning? And so I kind of pointed out because I know a lot of people with ADHD. Some people were truly diagnosed and they're doing some great things, but they don't. They learn differently. They process information differently. A lot of actors are considered what we call neurodivergent, which means that
Hmm.
they fall on the non-typical side of learning and processing information, which is sort of like in their sense a gift because it helps them connect characters. It helps them kind of lose themselves into roles. And you sometimes if you just have the linear thinking, it's hard to do that. And so that was like really the impetus for me, the driving force to write that article because again, I feel like especially for an actor, if you don't you often need that ADHD to kind of dive into a character and be able to get lost into a character, lost into another world, which is what required for success. The technical side of acting is getting lost, getting absorbed into a character. So that can be a superpower. Um, Also, doing a lot of things. A lot of people ask me, "Well, how do you do all this stuff?" Write, do, and I think that's because I can do several things at once. And yeah, maybe it might be a detriment at some point or hold me back a little bit because I might not be 100% focused all the time on one single task. But I still do a decent job on everything.
And
And the person's guest that I was a podcast under had several businesses, wrote several books, had a very successful show of his own, and yet people ask him, "How do you manage all that?" Again, a lot of times I think being at ADHD, we don't distill. We can both compartmentalize
mhm.
and say, okay, I'm going to work on this, I'm going to work on this, I'm working on that. Now, if you were to look at my this is you most people would get really, I guess, overwhelmed if you looked at my browser tab window right now because I'd have a lot of windows open because I'm doing like five things at once. I'm writing this email. Okay, I'm researching that. I'm working on this project. So Um, and that might be considered but I don't look at that as a something wrong with me. And I think society just in general has something must be wrong with me
I think
mentality.
this is the part that I wanted to lean into, because I think so often, I mean, the cliche term is labels. I'd like to even get past the cliche, but the sense of putting conclusions on things that don't need a conclusion. And so I'm a big believer, like for myself, I've done a lot of things later in my life. And there's a lot of things that I've done scattered and begun and what have you. And I could take the label, you said it a little while back, where people use, you didn't say it exactly like this, but reasonably close, where people say things like, oh, my anxiety this, or my depression that, or, and bring this coat that they're wearing in terms of this big, heavy coat that they're wearing, which I'm a big believer it like limits you in terms of the choices that you will make, or your ability to stay with something. So the term that you used, which I should be more familiar with, neurodivergent, divergent. I want you to you say something. I'm going to read what you said, and I love this. Um, it speaks for itself. I was going to ask you to comment on it, and feel free to do so. You wrote this, and it meant something to me, where you talked about you're not broken, lazy, or undisciplined. You were wired for a different kind of brilliance, one that doesn't always fit inside institutions, job descriptions, or report cards. But in the right setting, with the right support and understanding, you'll fly. Where, in addition to acting, what would be some other types of professions where you could see that sort of mindset benefiting them?
I would think anything in innovation, creativity,
Got it.
um, even like with the whole thing with now the whole AI revolution, these
Mhm.
coders, these develop these inventors that are coming up with new ideas. So anything that requires like a creativity, I think is brilliant
Mhm.
because we're not meant to be. That was like the whole part of that. We're not meant to be put in a box.
Mhm.
That's not. People are not meant to be put into a box and say, okay, this is the way it is. And this is the only way it is. Even though they may be conditioned to do that way, and I've had a lot of comments from that article where people were even messaging me saying, I thought something. I was always taught something was wrong with me, or that was a message that was communicated to me through my teachers or through even their family.
Yep.
Sometimes said that something is wrong. I'm like, no, there's not. It's just you learn it different way. That's all it is.
Mhm. I'm going to ask you from another article, which I love to see. And the title of your article is Not Ready as a Lie: The Psychology Behind Our Greatest Self-Deception. And you talk about the high cost of waiting. And you said something based upon information from Stanford psychologist Albert Bandura. You talk about the sense of each time you say not yet, you reinforce the neural pathways that say you're not capable. Walk me through that a little bit.
So when you say not yet, because that's where perfectionism comes in. Well, I'm not ready to do this, go out and do, or even be a coach because I need this extra training. I'm not ready to be a podcaster because I need more knowledge, or I'm not ready to go
Mhm.
out and teach yet because I need more. I don't have this certification or that
Mhm.
training. And the way the world is set up and with the way of learning is, there's never going to be enough. If you look at it that way, you're never going to be ready. And that's the whole point. So if you take action now, you could always get extra certification while you're doing what you're setting out to do. You could always get that extra class because they'll never be ready. And oftentimes there's a fundamental reason as to why you procrastinate. And I mentioned this in an article too because there may be some underlying trauma there
Mhm. Mhm.
that and I often say, and a lot of the coaches that I've worked with and trained with myself come with the mentality that procrastination is really a response to trauma. So, and it may be childhood trauma that you're
Mhm.
reacting or responding to. Now, there's a lot of programs out there. There's hundreds of programs out, thousands of programs actually, about eliminating procrastination, which is great, but they're not addressing the underlying reason for the procrastination. Yeah, having these systems is great, but there's a reason to do that. And we'll justify ourselves. I myself, am guilty of this too. used to justify, oh, I just work well under pressure. That's all. Just give me that pressure and I'll work well under it. That's not true.
Nope.
Um, you know, now, yes, a lot of us can do great work when we're put on the gun in the last minute. But is it going to be a greatest? I'm not sure, of that. I can't say that for sure. And it's only going to give us more anxiety, too. So, and it's a big problem because even as a college professor, I noticed when I would have a due date for an assignment, how a half hour before it's supposed to be due, everyone was working on it. And even though I gave them sometimes weeks or months to do the assignment, yet everyone's doing it at the moment, at the under the gun.
Yes.
And it's not just one; it's everybody does it.
So how do you break through? Obviously, each individual is different. So this would never require an answer. Well, just do this. But you talk about like some micro steps, things that you can do. Let's stick with the procrastination for a moment, of ways that you can push through. If, say, I'm not prepared to get to my childhood trauma at this point, what are some things that you could do prior just to get the assignment done and not, like you said, be in the classroom with you 15 minutes before I have to turn it in, looking at you, saying, oh, I'm still working. What are some things that you could do to take the pressure off, so to speak?
So you create a calendar. Yeah, and say these are the steps I'm going to do. I'm going to write a couple of paragraphs today, and then or I'm going to research this aspect of the project today.
Mhm.
And you don't sit there and say, I know I have to do it. I'm going to set this time. No, you create it right then and there. And that's part of like even having a good coach, because a good coach is going to help you keep you accountable. Okay, what date will you have this by? Or when will you have this by? Okay, let me know right now, put it on your calendar.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really the way to go, in a sense, is to do that. Is to put it on your calendar and take action and not say, oh, yeah, I'll get to it. Because if you say I'll get to it, you will, but not until you really absolutely have to.
And you're never turning in your best work, no pun intended.
No, you're not. You're not. Maybe even 75% there, or 70, or 80%, but it's not going to be 100%, no matter how good it is, because you're going to be under so much stress, and the adrenaline's going to be pumping, and you make some foolish mistakes or some careless errors that you could have easily had avoided had you planned more thoroughly.
I find the sense that so many things are solvable, and there are or I'll say it better, based on our conversation, that you find that there are so many problems that can be avoided if you are not just being prepared, but that you are willing to do the real homework, whether it's the mindset or sort of homework, whether it's the preparation, whether it is breaking it into bite-sized pieces, whether it's being just honest about where I am or who I am, or, or the bravery to step forward and say, I'm not right, or something's not right, or those sorts of things. It's at least from my experience, when I've done it, is wildly freeing. I want to allude to something before we break, because I went to your website, and folks, listen, I'm no expert in much, but I'm literally speaking to Albert before we went live, and I'm saying, oh my God, and your book is called Speak with Confidence. So I'm on Albert's website, and I'll throw myself under a bus. I have no problem with that. But and I'm like, I'm seeing these, like, there's gotta be albertbramante.com. The link will be in the bio, folks. You don't have to write anything down, and we're not starting with www whatever. The links will be right there. Click it. Why? Because I found this series of recordings that I think would be wildly helpful. Hypnosis based, a myriad of topics that I just think are incredible. Talk to us about that a little bit, Albert.
Sure. So on my website, there are about a series of audio tapes that you could listen to in a state of like light relaxation. And they deal with anything from public speaking to leadership to addictions to sports performance to sleeping to overall self-improvement. And so you listen to these things over and over again. You could download when you download them, you purchase them, you download them, and you can listen to it repeatedly over and over again. It's best to listen to them on earbuds or headsets, and it's also I really encourage you to listen to it when you have a moment of downtime, not when you're driving or doing anything that requires concentration.
I'm glad you say that, but still, I always feel like for these sorts of things, the lengths of these tend to be about how long?
They're about 15 to 17 minutes, so they're not long at all.
No, that's when you think of all of the meditation platforms, this is definitely, you would say, a significant cut above in regards to the specificity of the topics, the taking advantage of your expertise, again, hypnosis, NLP, your education, your direct experience. I would think that this would be, and I don't mean to sound like a shill, but I just feel like that these are fascinating things to have because, like you said, do them during when you have downtime. Do them when you're jammed up and not while you're driving a car. But I just believe these sorts of things can just break up that sort of like boulder of tension, and I find that for me, when I do these sorts of things, I tend to deliver my best work, and when I don't, I have I've come up short. So for myself, I think the best way to work is with a cleared head. You want to be authentic. The best way to do it is with a cleared head, and right. And Albert Bramante, you were great today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for the expertise. I thank you for the examples. So your website will be here. I find your LinkedIn page fantastic. So you show those links on your website, and I know. But would they be the best ways to reach you?
Yes, website, LinkedIn would definitely be great. I'm very active on that. And my website, and also Instagram as well. So
great.
Those are the places to reach me at, and I'd be happy to, work, talk to your team and schedule a call together. And I'd be happy to help you in any way that I can.
It's awesome. Albert Bramante, thank you so much for showing up for me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, John.
100%. And folks, you just heard another episode of Your Message Received. Keep liking, watching, sharing, subscribing, telling all your friends, and do the work. It never fails. Do the work. You'll get so much more joy. And thanks so much for checking us out. John Duffin here, Duffin Media. Have a great rest of the day, and we will talk soon. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.